4 months into the journey, Commander Sarah Chen feels it first in her bones. A deep, persistent ache that no amount of rest can ease. She floats through the cramped habitat module, reaching for a handhold, and her fingers miss by inches. Her depth perception has changed. Something behind her eyes is shifting, pressing, distorting. In the mirror during her morning routine, she notices her face looks swollen, puffy, as if she's been crying for days. But there are no tears in microgravity, only the slow accumulation of fluids that no longer know which way is down. By month 5, the bruises appear without cause, dark purple patches spreading across her arms like watercolor bleeding through paper. Her crewmate reports the same. They compare their symptoms in hushed tones, careful not to alarm mission control. Not yet. The radiation dosimeter readings climb steadily, day after day, invisible particles tearing through the spacecraft hull, through their bodies, leaving trails of cellular damage no human eye can see. Sarah's bones are dissolving from within, leaching calcium into her bloodstream at rates that would take years of aging on Earth. Her muscles, despite hours of resistance exercises, grow weaker with each passing week. The human body, it turns out, was never meant to leave home. This is not science fiction. This is the brutal calculus of biology meeting the void. For generations, we have dreamed of Mars. The red planet glowing in our night sky like a promise, like destiny written in rust and stone. We have imagined gleaming habitats beneath geodesic domes, boots crunching on alien soil, flags planted in extraterrestrial ground. The romance of exploration burns bright in our collective imagination. Mars as humanity's next chapter, our insurance policy against extinction, our manifest destiny written across the solar system. But between that dream and its realization lies a gauntlet of biological horror that evolution never prepared us for. Because every system in your body, every cell, every molecule, every unconscious process that keeps you alive was sculpted over millions of years by one relentless force. Earth's gravity, Earth's atmosphere, Earth's magnetic shield. Remove those conditions, and the human body doesn't adapt. It begins, slowly and systematically, to fail. Tonight, we will journey through the devastating reality of what a trip to Mars would actually do to the human body. Not the sanitized version from space agency promotional videos, but the medical truth documented in astronauts who have spent mere months in low Earth orbit, and the projections for what 18 months to 2 years in deep space would unleash. We will witness invisible radiation shredding DNA, bones becoming as fragile as chalk, vision deteriorating as intracranial pressure reshapes the eyeball itself, immune systems collapsing, leaving the body vulnerable to infections that would be minor on Earth but could become fatal beyond our atmospheres. Protection. The question isn't whether we can build a rocket capable of reaching Mars. We can. The question is whether we can keep the crew alive, functional and sane long enough to arrive. And even more troubling, whether they could ever return home, or if the journey itself would change them so fundamentally that Earth's gravity would become the final threat. Why did evolution make us so perfectly adapted to one world and so fatally vulnerable everywhere else? What is it about the human form, so resilient in some ways, that becomes desperately fragile the moment we leave our atmosphere? These questions don't have comfortable answers. Before we drift deeper into this sobering journey, I'd like to know, where in the world are you watching this from, and what time is it there? Drop a comment below. It's humbling to think about how many different places and time zones connect in moments like this. All of us still bound to Earth's surface, contemplating what it might cost to leave. Now settle in. Let your curiosity sharpen. What we're about to explore may change how you think about humanity's future among the stars. Let's begin. As our spacecraft leaves Earth's protective embrace and ventures toward the red planet, we cross an invisible threshold. Behind us lies the magnetic field that has shielded life on Earth for billions of years, a cosmic fortress woven from the planet's molten iron core. Ahead lies something far more sinister than the vacuum of space itself, a universe saturated with radiation that does not discriminate, does not rest, and cannot be seen until it is already too late. The journey to Mars is not just a passage through distance. It is a journey through an invisible storm that has been raging since the birth of stars. Out here, beyond the magnetosphere's sanctuary, cosmic rays travel at nearly the speed of light, carrying with them the accumulated fury of exploded suns, colliding galaxies, and black holes feeding in distant corners of the cosmos. These particles, protons and atomic nuclei stripped bare by unimaginable violence, pierce through spacecraft walls as if they were paper. They pass through human tissue with ease, leaving trails of destruction at the cellular level that the body may never fully repair. On Earth, we receive approximately 0.1 to 0.2 rads of radiation per year from natural sources. Radon in our basements, cosmic rays filtered by our atmosphere, trace elements in the soil beneath our feet. Airline pilots and flight attendants, who spend their careers at high altitudes where atmospheric shielding thins, might accumulate 0.5 rads annually. This is the baseline of existence on a protected world. But the moment our spacecraft clears Earth's magnetic field, the rules change entirely. During the 6 to 9 month journey to Mars, astronauts would be exposed to approximately 300 millisieverts of radiation, roughly equivalent to 30 rads. This is more than one, and memory that did not improve over time. They became anxious, unable to recognize objects they had encountered before, disoriented in environments that should have been familiar. If this translates to humans, and preliminary evidence suggests it might, then astronauts on a Mars mission could begin experiencing cognitive decline during the journey itself. Memory lapses, difficulty concentrating, impaired decision-making. These are not minor inconveniences when every action in space requires precision. When a single miscalculation can mean the difference between survival and catastrophe. The very organ needed to navigate the complexities of deep space travel may be the first casualty of the journey. The cardiovascular system, too, suffers in ways that are only now being understood. Radiation accelerates the development of atherosclerosis, the hardening and narrowing of arteries that leads to heart attacks and strokes. Astronauts exposed to deep space radiation during Apollo missions have shown statistically higher rates of cardiovascular disease decades after their flights. The particles damage the endothelial cells, lining blood vessels, triggering inflammation and plaque formation. What would normally take decades of aging can be compressed into a matter of years or even months under sustained cosmic ray exposure. Upon arrival at Mars, the nightmare does not end. Mars has no global magnetic field, only weak localized patches of magnetism embedded in ancient crust. Its atmosphere, a wisp of carbon dioxide barely 1% the density of Earth's, provides negligible shielding. Standing on the Martian surface, an astronaut would be exposed to roughly 200 millisieverts per year, about 1,000 times the annual dose on Earth. Every moment spent outside a habitat, every surface excursion, every repair conducted under the Martian sky accumulates dose upon dose of cellular damage. Current shielding technology offers limited protection and comes with severe constraints. Traditional materials like lead or steel provide some defense against solar radiation, but are nearly useless against high-energy cosmic rays. In fact, when cosmic rays strike heavy nuclei in shielding materials, they can create secondary radiation through a process called spallation, where the collision fragments into additional harmful particles. Some studies suggest that thick aluminum shielding, the type used in most spacecraft, might actually increase radiation exposure in certain scenarios. Alternative approaches are being explored. Water, with its hydrogen-rich composition, is more effective at absorbing radiation than metal and could line spacecraft walls or surround sleeping quarters. Polyethylene plastics show promise. Some designs propose surrounding crew compartments with supplies, food, and water tanks, using consumables as improvised shielding. Yet all of these solutions add weight, and in spaceflight, weight is the enemy. Every kilogram of shielding is a kilogram that cannot be fuel, life support equipment, or scientific instruments. The mathematics of rocket propulsion are unforgiving, and the amount of shielding needed to reduce radiation to safe levels would require spacecraft so massive they would be impossible to launch with current technology. Perhaps the most haunting aspect of radiation exposure is its reach across time. The damage does not stop with the astronaut. Radiation can cause mutations in reproductive cells, genetic changes that could be passed to children who were never in space at all. We do not yet know the full extent of these hereditary effects, but the possibility exists that a mission to Mars could alter the genetic legacy of its crew, rippling forward through generations. To journey to Mars is to accept that the universe itself is hostile to biological life. Space is not empty. It is filled with invisible particles carrying the energy of stellar death, and every one of them is a bullet aimed at the fragile chemistry that allows us to think, to remember, to live. The radiation nightmare is not a single event, but a constant companion, an enemy that cannot be fought, only endured. And unlike the challenges of microgravity or isolation, radiation leaves permanent scars written into the very code of life itself. As our spacecraft hurtles through the void toward Mars, carrying its fragile human cargo, something silent and invisible begins to happen. Something that requires no collision, no malfunction, no catastrophic failure. Inside the bodies of the astronauts, their bones begin to dissolve. This is not metaphor. This is physiology. In the absence of gravity, the human skeleton, evolved over millions of years to stand upright against Earth's pull, begins to dismantle itself. The process is gradual but relentless. Bone density drops at a rate of 1 to 2% per month. To comprehend what this means, we must understand that on Earth, severe osteoporosis patients might lose the same amount in an entire year. In space, the human body loses it in 30 days. The mechanism is elegant in its simplicity, brutal in its consequences. Bones are not static structures. They are living tissue, constantly rebuilding and breaking down in a delicate balance, maintained by specialized cells called osteoblasts and osteoclasts. Osteoblasts build new bone, laying down mineral deposits that create strength and structure. Osteoclasts tear old bone down, removing weakened material so it can be replaced. On Earth, this cycle maintains equilibrium because gravity provides constant mechanical stress. Every step we take, every movement we make, sends signals through our skeletal system that tell our bones they are needed, that they must remain strong. In microgravity, those signals vanish. Without the constant pull of Earth, the body interprets weightlessness as a message that bones are no longer necessary. Why maintain dense, heavy skeletal tissue when there is nothing to resist? The osteoclasts continue their work, breaking down bone, but the osteoblasts slow their production dramatically. The balance tips. Calcium, phosphorus, and other minerals that once formed the rigid architecture of the skeleton begin leaching into the bloodstream, eventually expelled from the body entirely. Astronauts are not just losing bone density, they are quite literally urinating away their skeletons. The rate of this loss is staggering when measured across the duration of a Mars mission. A round trip to Mars, including time spent on the surface, would take approximately 2 to 3 years. Even with the reduced gravity on Mars, which is only 38% of Earth's, the cumulative bone loss during such a journey could reach catastrophic levels. Some astronauts on the International Space Station, spending only 6 months in orbit, have experienced bone density loss equivalent to what a postmenopausal woman might lose in 2 decades. Extrapolate that across years, and we begin to see skeletal degradation that borders on irreversible. The bones most affected are those that bear weight on Earth: the hips, the spine, the femur, the pelvis. These are the structural pillars of human locomotion, and in space, they become the first casualties. Studies of long-duration astronauts have revealed bone density reductions of 10 to 20% in weight-bearing bones, even with aggressive countermeasures in place. Some researchers have observed that certain regions of bone may never fully recover, even after years back on Earth. The trabecular bone, the spongy interior network that provides structural support, appears particularly vulnerable to permanent damage. This raises a profound and unsettling question. Could a journey to Mars render astronauts permanently fragile? Current countermeasures aboard the International Space Station include rigorous exercise protocols. Astronauts spend approximately 2 hours per day on resistance training and cardiovascular exercise, using specially designed equipment that simulates the loading forces bones would experience on Earth. Resistance bands, treadmills with harnesses, and machines that create artificial resistance all attempt to trick the body into believing gravity still exists. These measures help, slowing the rate of bone loss, but they do not eliminate it. Even the most disciplined exercise regimen cannot fully replicate the continuous multidirectional stress that gravity naturally provides every moment of every day. Pharmaceutical interventions have also been explored. Bisphosphonates, drugs used on Earth to treat osteoporosis, have shown some promise in reducing bone resorption in space. These medications work by inhibiting osteoclast activity, essentially slowing the breakdown side of the bone remodeling equation. Yet drugs come with their own complications, side effects, long-term unknowns, and the fundamental problem that they address symptoms rather than causes. The body still believes, at a cellular level, that bones are unnecessary. Medication can only hold back the tide for so long. Perhaps the most concerning aspect of bone loss is what happens when astronauts finally reach Mars. After months in microgravity, their skeletons weakened and brittle, they must suddenly endure the stress of landing, of standing upright again, of moving in gravity, even if reduced. the risk of fracture becomes acute. A broken femur on Earth is a medical emergency. A broken femur on Mars could be a death sentence. There are no ambulances, no hospitals, no emergency surgeries available within millions of miles. A structural failure of the skeleton becomes not just a medical crisis, but an existential one for the entire mission. Even routine activities on the Martian surface carry heightened danger. Climbing equipment, carrying supplies, responding to emergencies, all of these tasks demand skeletal strength that may no longer exist. An astronaut who trips and falls might experience fractures that would have been impossible with healthy bones. The irony is profound. We journey to Mars to explore, to build, to expand human presence beyond Earth. But the journey itself may render us incapable of performing the very work we traveled so far to accomplish. There is also the psychological dimension to consider, though it intersects uncomfortably with the physical. Astronauts are acutely aware of what is happening to their bodies. They feel themselves becoming weaker, more vulnerable. They know that with each passing week, their bones are thinning, that they are becoming versions of themselves that could not survive the world they left behind. This knowledge, carried across months and years, becomes its own burden. Not just the fear of injury, but the quiet certainty of decline. Some scientists have proposed more radical solutions. Artificial gravity, generated by rotating spacecraft, could theoretically maintain bone density by reintroducing the mechanical stress bones require. Yet the engineering challenges are immense, the costs astronomical, and no such system has ever been tested for long-duration human spaceflight. Other researchers explore advanced pharmaceutical cocktails, gene therapies that might alter how bones respond to weightlessness, or even preemptive treatments that increase bone density before launch to create a buffer against inevitable loss. Each solution remains speculative, unproven, and years away from practical implementation. What we know with certainty is this: the human skeleton was not designed for the cosmos. It evolved in a gravitational field, shaped by millions of years of adaptation to a single planet's pull. To leave that field is to step outside the environmental parameters that made our bodies possible. Bone loss in microgravity is not a malfunction. It is the body responding logically to conditions it was never meant to endure. As our spacecraft continues its silent approach to Mars, the crew floats weightlessly through corridors, their bones quietly dissolving into the void, atom by atom. They exercise, they take their medications, they monitor their density scans with growing concern, and they know, as surely as they know the distance to home, that they are becoming fragile in ways that may never be undone. The journey to Mars demands not just courage, but sacrifice measured in calcium and phosphorus, counted in the silent weakening of the very framework that holds us upright. In the silence of space, your muscles begin to disappear, not slowly over years, but measurably within days. Muscle atrophy in microgravity is not a gradual decline. It is a systematic dismantling of the physical strength that defines human capability. On Earth, gravity is an invisible trainer, constantly challenging every movement, every step, every moment of standing upright. Remove that force, and the body interprets the absence as a signal. These muscles are no longer needed. The transformation begins almost immediately. Within the first week of weightlessness, astronauts can lose up to 20% of their muscle mass. The legs and back, the anti-gravity muscles that support our upright posture deteriorate fastest. These are the muscles that evolved over millions of years to carry us across savannas, climb mountains, and build civilizations. In space, they become evolutionary artifacts, unnecessary structures that the body begins to cannibalize for energy. The protein that once formed powerful muscle fibers breaks down, releasing amino acids into the bloodstream. What took months or years to build through training and exercise can vanish in weeks of floating through darkness. The process is profoundly efficient and utterly merciless. On Earth, when we lift an object, walk up stairs, or even maintain posture while sitting, our muscles contract against the constant pull of gravity. This resistance triggers cellular mechanisms that maintain and build muscle tissue. Satellite cells activate, protein synthesis increases, and muscle fibers grow denser and stronger. But in microgravity, these signals cease. The body, always conserving resources, begins metabolic calculations. Why maintain expensive muscle tissue that consumes oxygen and energy when it serves no apparent purpose? The decision is made at a cellular level, below consciousness, beyond willpower. The muscles begin to shrink. For astronauts on a mission to Mars, lasting anywhere from 6 to 9 months one way, this presents an existential problem. Exercise becomes not a choice but a survival requirement. The International Space Station maintains elaborate exercise equipment, treadmills with harnesses that pull astronauts downward, resistance machines that simulate weight training. Crew members are required to exercise 2 to 3 hours every single day, fighting against the very nature of their environment to preserve what their bodies are programmed to abandon. And yet, despite these intensive protocols, despite hours of grueling workouts in conditions where sweat does not drip but clings to skin in floating droplets, muscle loss continues. Exercise in space can slow the atrophy, but it cannot stop it entirely. The challenge is not just effort, but physics itself. On Earth, when you perform a squat with 200 pounds, gravity ensures that every repetition loads your muscles with genuine resistance. In microgravity, resistance must be artificially created through elastic bands, hydraulic systems, or carefully designed machines. But these cannot perfectly replicate the constant, omnidirectional load that gravity provides throughout every moment of every day. Walking across a room on Earth exercises muscles. Sleeping exercises muscles as your body maintains position against the pull downward. In space, even sleep becomes a form of sensory deprivation for the muscular system. Perhaps more concerning than the visible muscles is what happens to the one muscle we cannot afford to lose: the heart. Throughout our lives on Earth, the human heart pumps against gravity, working to push blood upward from the legs back to the chest, maintaining blood pressure, ensuring that oxygen reaches the brain, regardless of whether we stand or lie down. In microgravity, this workload vanishes. Blood distributes evenly throughout the body without gravitational pooling. The heart, sensing this easier environment, begins to adapt. It becomes smaller, weaker, less efficient. This cardiovascular deconditioning is insidious because it happens silently, without pain, without obvious symptoms, until the moment when gravity returns. Studies of astronauts returning from long-duration missions reveal hearts that have atrophied by up to 25%. The left ventricle, responsible for pumping oxygenated blood throughout the body, shows reduced mass and decreased pumping capacity. When these astronauts attempt to stand after landing, Their cardiovascular systems struggle to respond. Blood pressure drops. Dizziness overwhelms. Some cannot stand without assistance. Their hearts, once powerful enough to sustain marathon running or mountain climbing, now struggle with the simple act of remaining upright on their home planet. For a Mars mission, this creates a profound paradox. After months in transit, arriving at Mars with weakened muscles and a deconditioned heart, astronauts must immediately perform some of the most physically demanding tasks of the entire mission. They must guide the spacecraft through entry, descent, and landing, maneuvers requiring split-second reactions and physical endurance. They must don heavy spacesuits, each weighing up to 300 pounds in Earth gravity, though admittedly lighter in Mars's reduced 38% gravity. They must move equipment, establish habitats, conduct repairs, all while their bodies are at their weakest point in years. Mars's gravity, while present, may offer little salvation. At roughly 1/3 of Earth's gravitational pull, it provides some resistance, some stimulus for muscle maintenance, but whether this is sufficient remains an open question. No human has ever experienced extended exposure to partial gravity. We have data from microgravity environments and from Earth's full gravity. But Mars exists in an unexplored middle ground. Some scientists theorize that partial gravity might slow muscle atrophy compared to complete weightlessness. Others suggest it may not be enough to prevent the body from continuing its systematic breakdown of unnecessary tissue. We simply do not know. The metabolic changes accompanying muscle atrophy extend beyond simple tissue loss. As muscle breaks down, the body's basal metabolic rate decreases. Fewer calories are needed to maintain a smaller muscle mass, but appetite regulation, evolved over millennia on Earth, may not adjust appropriately. Some astronauts experience decreased appetite in space, compounding the problem. Others maintain normal hunger despite reduced caloric needs, leading to potential weight gain in the form of fat, even as muscle vanishes. The body composition shifts dramatically. Astronauts may return from space weighing the same as when they left, but the distribution has changed. Muscle has been replaced by fat, strength by weakness, capability by fragility. Perhaps the most troubling consideration is the return journey. After spending months or even years on Mars, astronauts must board their spacecraft for another 6 to 9 months of transit back to Earth. Arriving home, they will face full gravity for the first time in potentially 2 years or more. Their muscles, already weakened from the outbound journey and only partially maintained by Mars's reduced gravity, must survive another extended period of atrophy before confronting the full weight of Earth's gravitational embrace. Some researchers quietly wonder whether extended Mars missions might create a one-way journey not by choice but by biology. Whether astronauts might become so adapted to reduced gravity that returning to Earth becomes not just difficult but physiologically impossible. This is not science fiction catastrophizing. This is extrapolation from known data, measured in the bodies of astronauts who return from 6-month missions fundamentally changed. Muscle atrophy in space is not a side effect. It is a transformation, a reminder that our bodies are exquisitely designed for one specific environment, Earth, and that leaving that environment, even temporarily, requires fighting against billions of years of evolution that assumed gravity would always be present. The question facing Mars missions is not whether muscle atrophy will occur. but whether we can develop countermeasures sufficient to preserve enough strength to survive both the journey and the destination, to work and explore and eventually, perhaps, to come home. As the spacecraft continues its 7-month journey toward Mars, something imperceptible begins to happen inside the bodies of our astronauts. Something subtle at first, then increasingly troubling. It starts with a slight pressure behind the eyes, a faint headache that comes and goes. Then comes the blurring. Words on the instrument panels become harder to read. Distant objects lose their sharpness. The astronauts adjust their vision, squinting, blinking, assuming it is fatigue from the endless vigilance required in deep space. But this is not exhaustion. This is the beginning of a transformation that medical science is only beginning to understand, a condition so mysterious that it was not even recognized until astronauts began spending months aboard the International Space Station. Its name is clinical, almost forgettable: Spaceflight-Associated Neuro-ocular Syndrome, or SANS. Yet its implications are profound and potentially catastrophic for any mission to Mars. SANS was discovered not through prediction, but through observation. When astronauts returned from long-duration missions aboard the ISS, many reported vision changes. Some could no longer see as clearly as they once had. Others experienced persistent problems with near vision, struggling to focus on objects close to them. At first, this was attributed to aging or pre-existing conditions. But as more astronauts reported similar symptoms, a pattern emerged. Something about extended time in microgravity was fundamentally altering the structure and function of the human eye. Medical examinations revealed changes that were both startling and unprecedented. Optic nerves had swollen. The backs of eyeballs had flattened. The delicate geometry of human vision, perfected over millions of years of evolution under Earth's gravity, was being reshaped by the conditions of space. The mechanism behind SANS is tied to one of the most fundamental challenges of microgravity: fluid shift. On Earth, gravity pulls fluids downward through our bodies. Blood pools in our legs. Fluid accumulates in our feet. Our cardiovascular system has evolved elaborate mechanisms to pump blood upward against gravity's constant pull. But in the weightlessness of space, these mechanisms continue working even though gravity has vanished. Without that downward pull, fluids redistribute throughout the body, shifting upward toward the head and chest. Astronauts often notice their faces becoming puffy, their sinuses feeling congested, their legs appearing thinner as fluid migrates away from the lower body. This is not merely cosmetic. The shift represents a profound redistribution of the body's internal pressures. As fluid accumulates in the upper body, pressure increases inside the skull. Intracranial pressure, normally regulated by the balance between fluid production and drainage, begins to rise. The brain, suspended in cerebrospinal fluid, experiences subtle but persistent changes in its environment. Most critically, this increased pressure affects the optic nerve, the delicate bundle of nerve fibers that connects each eye to the brain. Under normal Earth conditions, the optic nerve maintains a precise structure, transmitting visual information with extraordinary fidelity. But as intracranial pressure rises in microgravity, the optic nerve begins to swell. This swelling, called papilledema in severe cases, can be detected through careful examination. The optic disc, where the nerve enters the back of the eye, becomes enlarged and distorted. Blood vessels around the nerve dilate. The entire architecture of vision begins to change. Simultaneously, the eyeball itself undergoes transformation. The posterior portion of the eye, the back surface where light focuses onto the retina, begins to flatten. Human eyes evolved as nearly perfect spheres, their curvature precisely calibrated to bend incoming light onto the retina with remarkable accuracy. But prolonged exposure to altered fluid pressures distorts this sphere. The eyeball becomes slightly oblate, compressed from behind. This flattening changes the focal length of the eye, making it harder to focus on nearby objects. Some astronauts develop a condition resembling far-sightedness, requiring corrective lenses they never needed before their mission. In some cases, these changes persist long after returning to Earth. Months or even years later, vision remains altered, a permanent reminder of time spent beyond the pull of gravity. The mystery of SANS deepens when we examine how it affects different astronauts. Not everyone experiences the condition equally. Some astronauts show dramatic changes in eye structure, while others on the same mission exhibit minimal symptoms. Men appear more susceptible than women, though researchers are still uncertain why. Age, genetics, pre-existing anatomy, all may play roles, but the precise factors that determine severity remain elusive. Scientists have proposed numerous theories. Some suggest that the lymphatic system, which helps drain fluid from tissues, functions differently in microgravity. Others point to changes in carbon dioxide levels aboard spacecraft, which might alter blood vessel diameter and fluid dynamics. Still others wonder if the absence of day-night gravitational variations, the subtle tidal effects that occur as we stand and lie down on Earth, contributes to the problem by eliminating natural pressure fluctuations that help regulate intracranial pressure. What makes SANS particularly concerning for a Mars mission is not just the condition itself, but the uncertainty surrounding it. The astronauts who developed SANS spent months in microgravity, not the 7 months required to reach Mars, plus the time on the Martian surface, plus another 7 months to return home. Nearly 2 years of altered fluid dynamics could produce changes far more severe than anything yet observed. And unlike the ISS, where astronauts can be monitored continuously and evacuated within hours if necessary, astronauts traveling to Mars will be entirely on their own, separated from Earth by communication delays of up to 24 minutes and physical distances measured in tens of millions of miles. Consider the moment of arrival. After 7 months of journey, the spacecraft approaches Mars. This is the most critical phase of the entire mission. The crew must execute a precise landing sequence, guiding their vessel through the thin Martian atmosphere, deploying parachutes and retro-rockets with split-second timing. There is no margin for error, yet the astronauts piloting this descent may be suffering from degraded vision, struggling to read instruments, unable to focus clearly on the rapidly approaching surface. A miscalculation caused by impaired vision could turn humanity's greatest achievement into its most devastating failure. The implications extend beyond the landing itself. On Mars, astronauts will need to perform delicate scientific work, repair equipment, navigate unfamiliar terrain, all tasks that demand clear, reliable vision. Researchers are working urgently to understand SANS and develop countermeasures. Some have proposed using negative pressure devices, special garments that create suction around the lower body to pull fluid downward, mimicking gravity's effect. Others are investigating pharmaceutical interventions that might reduce intracranial pressure or prevent optic nerve swelling. specialized exercise protocols, alterations to spacecraft carbon dioxide levels, even dietary modifications, all are being explored, yet none have proven definitively effective. SANS remains stubbornly resistant to simple solutions, a reminder that the human body is not merely a machine that can be adjusted with the right settings, but a complex system evolved for one specific environment, Earth, and profoundly vulnerable when removed from it. As our astronauts continue their journey toward Mars, the pressure behind their eyes builds silently, invisibly. They cannot see it happening. They may not even feel it until the damage is already done. Vision, that most precious of senses, the one we rely on to navigate, to explore, to understand the world around us, slowly transforms in the darkness of space. And with it, transforms the very possibility of safely reaching the red planet we have dreamed of for so long. As our journey to Mars continues, stretching across months in the metallic confines of the spacecraft, something invisible begins to change. Deep within the body, at the cellular level, a quiet transformation is taking place. The immune system, that ancient guardian that has protected humanity through plagues, infections, and countless battles with microscopic invaders, begins to falter. In the weightless environment of space, immune cells lose their edge. They drift through the bloodstream, disoriented, unable to perform the precise choreography of defense that evolution has perfected over millions of years. This is not a sudden collapse. It is a gradual weakening, a silent erosion of the body's ability to recognize and destroy threats. And in the closed environment of a spacecraft, where every surface is shared, every breath recirculated, and every drop of water recycled, this weakening becomes dangerous in ways that are difficult to fully comprehend until it is too late. Microgravity affects immune cells with disturbing precision. White blood cells, the frontline defenders against infection, begin to behave strangely when removed from Earth's gravitational pull. Studies of astronauts aboard the International Space Station have revealed that T cells, critical components of the adaptive immune response, lose much of their ability to activate and proliferate when exposed to pathogens. Natural killer cells, which normally patrol the body, hunting for infected or cancerous cells, show decreased function. The distribution of immune cells throughout the body shifts, creating imbalances that leave certain tissues more vulnerable than others. It is as if the immune system, which evolved under constant gravitational pressure, suddenly finds itself operating in an environment for which it has no evolutionary preparation. The mechanisms behind this immune dysfunction are complex and interconnected. Without gravity, fluid shifts upward in the body, altering blood flow patterns and changing the way immune cells move through tissues. The lack of physical stress on bones and muscles creates inflammatory signals that confuse immune responses. Radiation exposure from cosmic rays damages DNA within immune cells, reducing their lifespan and effectiveness. Stress hormones, elevated by isolation, confinement, and the psychological burden of the mission, further suppress immune function. Each factor compounds the others, creating a cascade of vulnerability that deepens with every passing week. But perhaps the most unsettling consequence of this immune weakening is what happens to the viruses already living inside us. Astronauts on long-duration missions experience something that sounds like science fiction, but is documented medical reality. Dormant viruses reactivate. Herpes viruses, varicella zoster, Epstein-Barr, and cytomegalovirus, pathogens that normally remain suppressed by a healthy immune system begin to wake up. They emerge from their hiding places within nerve cells and tissues, multiplying and shedding viral particles. Studies have detected these reactivated viruses in astronaut saliva and urine samples, sometimes at levels hundreds of times higher than seen on Earth. Most astronauts show no symptoms during the mission, their weakened immune systems still managing to keep the viruses partially in check. But the implications are profound. If the immune system degrades further during the longer journey to Mars, these viral reactivations could progress from asymptomatic shedding to active disease, causing painful rashes, neurological complications, or systemic infections with no hospital, no pharmacy, and no way home. The environment inside the spacecraft itself becomes part of the problem. In microgravity, bacteria behave differently and not in ways that favor human survival. Research has shown that certain bacterial strains become more virulent in space. They grow faster, form thicker biofilms, and develop increased resistance to antibiotics. Salmonella becomes more lethal. E. coli produces more toxins. The bacteria that naturally live on human skin and in the gut, normally kept in balance by immune surveillance, begin to flourish in ways they cannot on Earth. Without gravity, they spread more easily through the air, hitchhiking on droplets that do not fall, but float indefinitely through the cabin. Every sneeze, every cough, every exhalation becomes a cloud of potential contagion that drifts slowly through the recycled atmosphere, settling eventually on surfaces where the bacteria can establish colonies and wait for the next person to touch, breathe, or inadvertently ingest them. In this closed environment, disease transmission takes on a unique character. There is no escape, no fresh air, no ability to quarantine effectively in a spacecraft, where every crew member must work in close proximity. If one person becomes ill, the infection spreads through the crew with mathematical inevitability. The confined space acts as an amplification chamber for pathogens, giving them repeated opportunities to jump from host to host, to mutate, to adapt to whatever weak defenses the crew's compromised immune systems can mount. Historical data from submarines and Antarctic research stations, the closest terrestrial analogues to long-duration spaceflight, show that respiratory infections cycle through crews repeatedly, sometimes taking novel forms as they pass from person to person in isolation. Wound healing becomes another concern in this immunocompromised state. In microgravity, even minor injuries heal more slowly. The inflammatory response that normally initiates tissue repair is blunted. Blood flow to wounds is altered. Collagen formation, essential for closing cuts and repairing damaged tissue, proceeds at a reduced rate. What might be a trivial scratch on Earth, something that would seal itself within days, could remain an open vulnerability for weeks in space, a potential entry point for infection, and with a weakened immune system unable to effectively fight off bacteria. Even small wounds carry the risk of becoming serious infections. Imagine a crew member developing appendicitis during the journey to Mars, requiring emergency surgery performed by non-specialists in zero-gravity conditions. The surgical wound itself becomes a race against infection, a challenge that modern medicine on Earth solves through sterile environments, powerful antibiotics, and robust immune responses, none of which can be guaranteed aboard a spacecraft hundreds of millions of miles from help. The potential for novel infections to emerge in a Mars habitat adds another layer of uncertainty. As the crew establishes a base on the Martian surface, they will be exposed to Martian dust, a fine toxic regolith that contains perchlorate compounds and is electrostatically charged. This dust will infiltrate the habitat despite best efforts at containment. How will compromised human immune systems respond to inhaling particles that Earth-evolved lungs have never encountered? Will the dust trigger inflammatory reactions, allergies, or chronic respiratory conditions? And if bacteria from Earth establish themselves in the Martian environment, evolving under different selective pressures, might they develop characteristics that make them unrecognizable to our immune defenses? Some researchers have proposed that the microbial ecosystems inside spacecraft and habitats might evolve into something entirely new, a sort of closed-loop microbiome shaped by recycling, radiation, and the constant presence of stressed human hosts. In this scenario, the distinction between commensal bacteria that normally live harmlessly on and in our bodies and pathogenic bacteria that cause disease could begin to blur. Microbes that were once benign might become opportunistic, taking advantage of weakened immune surveillance to colonize new niches within the human body. The immune system collapse in space is not merely a medical challenge. It is a fundamental biological barrier, a reminder that human physiology is exquisitely adapted to one specific environment, the surface of Earth, under one specific gravitational force. To journey to Mars is to carry with us a body that begins to fail the moment it leaves the conditions for which it was designed. Every passing day in transit, every month spent in reduced gravity on the Martian surface, represents a deepening vulnerability to threats both familiar and unknown. In the vastness of space, surrounded by cosmic hazards and cut off from medical infrastructure, the collapse of the immune system transforms every illness from an inconvenience into a potential catastrophe, a race between a crew's diminishing defenses and the relentless, patient persistence of microscopic life. Beyond the physical dangers, beyond the radiation and bone loss, there exists a threat that cannot be measured by instruments or detected by sensors. It is invisible, insidious, and perhaps the most unpredictable hazard of all: the human mind confronting its own limits in the vast silence of space. The journey to Mars is not just a voyage across distance. It is a descent into isolation so profound that it challenges the very architecture of human psychology. For 6 to 9 months, astronauts would travel through a void where Earth becomes merely a pale blue dot, then a star indistinguishable from others. No rescue is possible. No quick return exists. The spacecraft becomes not just a vehicle, but a prison, a world unto itself, measuring perhaps no larger than a small apartment, shared with the same handful of people, day after day, with no escape, no privacy, and no horizon beyond metal walls. Humans evolved in environments rich with sensory input, changing landscapes, diverse social interactions, the rhythm of day and night tied to a planetary rotation we have known for millions of years. In space, these anchors dissolve. The mind, deprived of its evolutionary context, begins to drift in ways that are subtle at first, then, increasingly, profound. Consider the communication delay. As the spacecraft travels farther from Earth, radio signals take longer to arrive. What begins as seconds of lag stretches into minutes, then up to 22 minutes each way at Mars's greatest distance from Earth. A conversation with loved ones becomes impossible. Every interaction transforms into an exchange of messages sent into the void, replies arriving so late that context has shifted. Emotions have evolved, and the moment of connection has long passed. This is not merely inconvenient. It is existentially isolating. The crew becomes untethered from Earth in ways that go deeper than physical distance. They cannot participate in real-time events. They cannot receive immediate comfort during moments of crisis. Every question posed to mission control requires patience, measured not in seconds, but in the slow passage of light across the solar system. Studies of isolated research stations on Earth, submarines beneath the ocean, and winter crews in Antarctica have revealed patterns that emerge when humans are confined together for extended periods. At first, there is camaraderie, the excitement of shared purpose. Then comes a phase researchers call the third quarter phenomenon, typically occurring around the midpoint of a long mission. Motivation wanes, irritations magnify, small habits of crewmates become unbearable. The way someone eats, breathes, speaks, gestures, all become sources of profound annoyance. In a spacecraft measuring perhaps 1,000 cubic feet of livable space, there is nowhere to retreat, no walk to clear the mind, no change of scenery to reset perspective. Just the same walls, the same faces, the same recycled air, day after month after year. Conflict in such environments is not just probable, it is virtually inevitable. And unlike disagreements on Earth, conflicts in space carry catastrophic potential. A damaged relationship might lead to communication breakdowns during critical operations. A moment of anger could result in a mistake that endangers the entire mission. The psychological screening process for astronauts is rigorous, but no amount of training can fully prepare the human psyche for the reality of being 140 million miles from home with no possibility of leaving. Sleep, that fundamental human need, becomes another casualty. The spacecraft has no natural day or night. Without the sun rising and setting in familiar patterns, the circadian rhythm, our internal biological clock honed over evolutionary time, begins to falter. Astronauts on the International Space Station report chronic sleep disruption despite following carefully designed schedules. They witness 16 sunrises and sunsets every 24 hours as the station orbits Earth. On a journey to Mars, even this artificial rhythm disappears. The sun becomes a distant point of light, unchanging in its intensity. Sleep cycles degrade, insomnia becomes common, and with sleep deprivation comes a cascade of psychological effects: impaired judgment, emotional instability, decreased cognitive function, and heightened susceptibility to depression and anxiety. Depression in space is not simply sadness. It is a rational response to an environment fundamentally hostile to human emotional needs. The monotony of the journey, the absence of natural beauty, the knowledge that every system failure could mean death, these weigh upon the mind with accumulating pressure. Some astronauts describe a phenomenon they call the Earth viewing effect in reverse. When viewing Earth from orbit, many experience profound awe and connection. But as Earth shrinks to a point and then vanishes into the background of stars, some crew members may experience the opposite, a crushing sense of insignificance, of being cast out from the only home humanity has ever known. Anxiety manifests in the constant awareness of danger. Unlike Earth, where we instinctively understand which environments are safe, space offers no such intuition. The spacecraft's hull, mere inches thick, is all that separates the crew from vacuum. Every creak, every vibration, every anomaly in system readings could be the prelude to catastrophe. This state of hypervigilance cannot be sustained indefinitely without psychological cost. The mind, constantly alert to threat, begins to fray at the edges. And then there is the more disturbing possibility, psychosis. While rare, instances of hallucinations, paranoia, and dissociative episodes have been documented in extreme isolation scenarios on Earth. In the confined environment of a spacecraft, far from medical intervention, such an event would be catastrophic. A crew member experiencing a psychotic break could pose danger not only to themselves, but to the entire mission. Sedation might be necessary, but managing a medically sedated crew member in microgravity for months presents challenges no mission has yet confronted. The cohesion of the team becomes not just important, but essential to survival. Yet team dynamics under extreme stress are fragile. Research from isolated Antarctic stations has documented the formation of subgroups, the emergence of scapegoating, and the breakdown of communication even among highly trained professionals. On a Mars mission, such fractures could prove fatal. Critical decisions require coordination. System repairs demand trust. A crew that has turned against itself, even subtly, becomes a crew that cannot function effectively. Psychologists have proposed countermeasures, virtual reality simulations of natural environments, carefully curated media from Earth, structured, psychological, like trying to inhale the exhaust of a dead world. Every step outside a habitat would require a suit. Every movement tethered to life support systems, pressure regulators, oxygen scrubbers. There is no such thing as stepping out for a minute without preparation. A puncture, a faulty valve, a cracked seal is not an inconvenience. It is a countdown. On Earth, we forget the air exists. On Mars, we would never be allowed to. Beneath our boots, the ground hides another danger. The soil of Mars is not soil in the way gardeners mean it. It is regolith, powdered rock, shattered by eons of impacts, ground into dust by a world without rain. Mixed into this dust are compounds called perchlorates, salts rich in chlorine and oxygen. On Earth, they are used in rocket fuel and explosives. On Mars, they coat the surface in concentrations that would make any health regulator shudder. Perchlorates can disrupt thyroid function, damage organs, and interfere with the body's metabolism. They can accumulate in tissues, quietly, slowly, over years. Every time a rover wheel churns up the ground, every time a future astronaut walks across the surface, they are kicking up a toxic powder. Bringing that dust back into a habitat means more than just sweeping the floor. It means contaminating air filters, water systems, even hydroponic farms. Gloves, suits, tools. Everything that touches the outside world becomes a potential vector, smuggling these compounds into the closed loop that keeps a small crew alive. On Earth, we wash dirt from our hands with water and soap. On Mars, we would need protocols closer to a biohazard lab. Air showers, chemical treatments, filtration systems designed to trap particles measured in microns. A single careless mistake might not kill anyone today or tomorrow, but it could shave years off a life already stretched thin by radiation, isolation, and reduced gravity. If the air and soil were not enough, Mars has one more constant reminder that it is not a place made for us. It's cold. Sunlight here is about half as strong as it is on Earth. The thin atmosphere holds almost no heat. Temperatures swing wildly. Near the equator on a summer afternoon, the surface can briefly warm above freezing, flirting with conditions that feel almost survivable. But once the sun dips, the warmth collapses. Nightfall brings a plunge into deep cold. -80, -100 degrees Celsius is not unusual. At the poles, it can drop even further, low enough for carbon dioxide in the air to freeze into dry ice that settles onto the ground. For the human body, these extremes are not just a technical challenge of heaters and insulation. They are a physiological stress that never fully relents. Our blood vessels constrict in the cold, raising blood pressure, straining the heart. Our extremities are always at risk. Frostbite and hypothermia are no longer wilderness survival topics. They are daily operational concerns. Misjudge a power budget and a heater fails, a suit runs low on energy, a thermal control system glitches. In minutes, fingers can stiffen, joints can lose flexibility, a visor can fog or frost over. Inside a habitat, systems must hold a thin line between freezing and boiling. Life support equipment, pumps and pipes all struggle against the aggression of a planet determined to equalize everything to its brutal baseline. Cold, thin, and dry. And then there is the sky. At first, the Martian atmosphere seems too thin to matter much. But it has one trick left: dust storms. Sometimes they form as small whirlwinds that dance across the plains, devils of dust no taller than a building. Sometimes they swell, merging into continent-spanning tempests that can last for weeks. And every so often, they grow into something almost mythic, a global storm, a shroud of fine particles that can wrap the planet from pole to pole. Unlike the towering thunderstorms of Earth, Martian dust storms are not violent walls of wind and rain. Their winds, though capable of reaching high speeds, move through such thin air that they would not knock you off your feet. The danger lies in the dust itself. The regolith is ground down into particles so fine they can float for days, infiltrating every crack, every seal, every mechanical joint. Its consistency has been compared to talcum powder or smoke. Inhaled, these particles can lodge deep in the lungs, far beyond the reach of coughs or mucus. Over time, they may scar tissue, reduce lung capacity, and trigger inflammatory responses that the already stressed immune system of a Mars traveler may not be able to handle. Even if you never breathe unfiltered air, dust can coat solar panels, choke radiators, jam airlocks. It grinds into moving parts, wearing away metals, eroding seals, sabotaging the very systems the crew depends on to breathe, drink, and stay warm. In many ways, the dust is Mars's most pervasive life form, a planet-wide contaminant that settles quietly, relentlessly, on everything. All the while, beneath our feet, a subtler transformation continues. Gravity itself changes the rules of our bodies. After months in microgravity on the journey out, our bones and muscles will have already weakened, despite exercise regimens and careful monitoring. On arrival, Mars offers only about 38% of Earth's gravity, a fragile compromise, stronger than weightlessness, weaker than home. At first, this reduced weight will feel like liberation. Joints move easily. Heavy equipment seems to float. Steps become bounding hops. But beneath the novelty lies uncertainty. We do not yet know what decades in Martian gravity would do to a human body that has already been softened by time and space. Will bones, already thinned, regain density? Or will they stabilize at a weaker state, leaving colonists constantly on the edge of fractures? Will the heart, having adapted to microgravity, struggle yet again to recalibrate to this in-between world, leading to chronic fatigue, dizziness, or fainting spells? Children, if they are ever born here, would grow up in a field of gravity no human child has ever experienced. Their bones, muscles, and organs might develop according to a blueprint Earth never had to consider. Mars could shape human anatomy into something subtly or profoundly different. And through all of this, the body still needs one thing that seems so simple on Earth that we rarely think about it: food. Growing food on Mars is not just a question of putting seeds in dirt and waiting. The dirt is laced with perchlorates and lacks organic matter. The air is unbreathable. Liquid water, left alone, boils away or freezes. Sunlight is weaker and filtered through a dusty sky that can darken for days during storms. To eat here, we must build ecosystems inside boxes. Hydroponic or aeroponic farms, glowing with artificial light, fed by recycled water and carefully balanced nutrients. Every leaf, every tomato, every grain of wheat becomes part of a closed-loop equation in which waste is not discarded but transformed. Carbon dioxide becomes plant fuel, plant matter becomes food, food becomes waste, and waste must be turned with precision back into something useful. Any imbalance in this cycle, trace contaminants from Martian dust, microbe blooms in water tanks, subtle nutrient deficiencies, could slowly erode the crew's health. Not all problems appear quickly. A missing micronutrient may not cause illness today or next month, but years later, in brittle bones, weakened hearts, or compromised immune systems. On Earth, a bad harvest means imports, supermarkets, aid. On Mars, there is no somewhere else. Food security is not just logistics, it's survival. As our imaginary boots sink into the iron-red dust, it becomes clear that Mars is not trying to kill us in one dramatic blow. It is doing something more insidious. It is testing every system we rely on, every layer of our biology, every piece of our technology, every assumption baked into a body and mind shaped by Earth. The thin air, the toxic soil, the freezing nights, the drifting dust, the low gravity, the fragile food cycles. They are not separate problems, but overlapping stresses, each one amplifying the others. To live here would mean accepting that the planet is not a backdrop, but an active participant in our story. A quiet, patient adversary that never sleeps and never compromises. For those who dream of planting a flag and building a new home on Mars, this is the reality waiting beyond the romance. A world that invites us with ancient river valleys and sunsets in a blue-tinted sky, then demands a toll from every cell in our bodies. And if something goes wrong in this hostile new world, if a bone breaks, an organ fails, or a system collapses, we are forced to confront the next question. What happens when you face a medical emergency 140 million miles from the nearest hospital? On Earth, a sudden pain in your side is an inconvenience. On the way to Mars, it can be a death sentence. The spacecraft hums quietly. The crew sleeps, or pretends to. Outside, there is nothing. No cities, no hospitals, no sirens racing through the night. Just a thin shell of metal and plastic drifting through a vacuum colder than any operating room on Earth. Inside, one crew member curls forward, clutching their abdomen. The pain is sharp, relentless, and growing worse. Appendicitis. On Earth, this is routine. A short ambulance ride, scans, a standard surgery. In many hospitals, appendectomies are so common, they're almost mundane. But here, halfway between two worlds, the nearest surgeon is tens of millions of miles away. There is no ER, no backup team, no intensive care. There is only a cramped module, a small medical kit, and a crew member who took a few months of emergency training before launch. The harsh reality of a trip to Mars is not just the slow, gradual damage to the human body. It is the terrifying question, What happens when something suddenly goes very, very wrong? Consider kidney stones, tiny shards of crystallized minerals, usually measured in millimeters, capable of bringing the strongest person to their knees. In microgravity, the way fluids move through the body changes. Calcium leached from thinning bones circulates in the bloodstream, and some of it can collect in the kidneys. Astronauts already face an increased risk of stone formation on long missions in low Earth orbit. Extend that to a months-long journey in deep space, with altered hydration, stress, and radiation subtly changing body chemistry, and the risk does not vanish, it grows. A kidney stone on Earth means powerful painkillers, imaging, perhaps a quick procedure using sound waves or surgery. On a Mars-bound ship, imaging equipment is limited, ultrasound at best. There is no CT scanner humming in the next room, no lithotripsy device waiting on standby. There is only pain, limited opioids, and the hope that the stone is small enough to pass on its own, and that the crew member can still function, because there is no spare pilot, no spare engineer, no substitute for the person who suddenly cannot stand upright. Then there are the emergencies we rarely think about until they become impossible to ignore. Teeth. On the International Space Station, astronauts undergo extensive dental screening. Cavities are fixed, wisdom teeth are often removed before flight, and any questionable work is addressed on the ground. But a mission to Mars stretches beyond the typical safety margins. Enamel cracks, fillings fail, infections appear without warning. A broken tooth with exposed nerve is more than discomfort. It is constant, throbbing pain, the kind that erodes concentration, disrupts sleep, and breeds infection in the confined environment of a sealed habitat. A dental abscess on Mars or in transit is not a quick trip to a local dentist. It may require cutting into gum tissue with improvised tools, draining an infection with limited anesthesia, and hoping the antibiotics on board are still potent enough to work. Because on this journey, even the medicine itself is fragile. On Earth, we take the reliability of medications for granted. Expiration dates are printed, storage conditions are controlled, and replacements are a phone call away. In deep space, medicine is a one-way shipment. Every pill, vial, and syringe loaded before launch must last not just months, but years. Radiation quietly penetrates packaging. Temperature cycles and vibrations during launch and flight stress, delicate chemical bonds. Some drugs degrade faster than expected, their active ingredients breaking down into something weaker, or in rare cases, something harmful. Studies on the International Space Station have already suggested that certain medications may lose potency more quickly in space than on Earth, even when stored carefully. On a Mars mission, there is no resupply capsule waiting to arrive next week. When a crew member goes into anaphylactic shock or septic shock, or experiences a heart arrhythmia, the only tools available are the ones that have survived the journey intact. If a critical medication has degraded, no amount of training or bravery can replace what has been lost. And even when the right drug exists, the act of treating a patient is transformed by an environment where gravity itself is missing. On Earth, blood obeys a familiar script. It flows downward. It pools. Surgeons position patients carefully, suction fluids from the field, and rely on gravity as an ally in every procedure. In microgravity, or even in the partial gravity of Mars, blood becomes something far more unpredictable. It doesn't drip, it clings. It forms floating globules that hang in the air, shimmering red in the cabin lights, ready to contaminate electronics, instruments, and lungs alike. A simple cut that bleeds freely on Earth becomes a hazard in space. Emergency surgery, even minor, becomes a nightmare. Every incision must be planned with the knowledge that once blood escapes the body, it will not fall neatly into a basin. It will spread, it will float, and it will carry with it bacteria, cells, and the risk of infection in a place where sterilization is brutally difficult. There are concepts for surgical tents, inflatable transparent bubbles that could enclose a patient and medical provider, capturing fluids, isolating the sterile field. There are ideas for special suction systems designed to trap blood before it can escape into the cabin. But concepts are not experience. No human has yet undergone full-scale emergency surgery in deep space. The first time it becomes necessary may be the first time anyone truly learns what is possible and what is not. Imagine trying to intubate a crew member whose lungs are filling with fluid. On Earth, the patient is laid flat. The provider bends over them, gravity keeping instruments in place. In microgravity, both patient and clinician must be anchored, hands and tools strapped down. The airway a moving target in a three-dimensional ballet where every unplanned motion can push them apart. Even drawing blood, inserting an IV, or performing CPR must be reimagined for a world where pressing on someone's chest pushes you away unless your feet, your knees, your entire body are tethered. In the silence of deep space, even calling for help changes. On the International Space Station, a medical question can be relayed to a doctor on the ground in seconds. Specialists watch vital signs from thousands of kilometers away, advising in real time. On the way to Mars, that link stretches and frays. The speed of light itself becomes an obstacle. Radio signals take minutes to cross the growing gulf between Earth and the spacecraft, up to 20 or more minutes one way. A simple back-and-forth consultation can consume nearly an hour. "Should I give this drug?" the crew medical officer might ask. Silence. The answer is already on its way, but it will not arrive before the situation changes, and perhaps before a decision must be made. In the most critical moments, Earth will be an echo, not a guide. When the crew finally reaches Mars and establishes a foothold on the surface, the situation improves only slightly. There is some gravity, 1/3 that of Earth. Equipment can be unpacked and arranged more comfortably, but the delay remains. The nearest hospital is no closer. Evacuation is not a phone call or a launch window away. It is another entire mission. This is perhaps the most unforgiving truth of Mars exploration. There is no medical evacuation, no rescue helicopter, no diversion to the nearest runway. Once a crew commits to the journey and leaves Earth's gravity well behind, they are medically isolated in a way no humans have ever been. Any emergency must be solved with what is already on board, by people who were never meant to be full-time doctors. Because astronauts, even on Mars missions, are not surgeons, anesthesiologists, and intensivists, all wrapped into one. They are pilots, engineers, scientists, geologists, communicators. At most, 1 or 2 crew members receive enhanced medical training, a blend of paramedic, nurse, and field surgeon. They learn how to suture, how to stabilize fractures, how to recognize major symptoms. They practice on mannequins, sometimes on animals or simulations. But they do not spend years in busy trauma centers, watching dozens of patients slide through the edge of life and back again. Yet in an emergency, that is exactly what will be asked of them. To open an abdomen, and remove a diseased organ, to drill into bone, to place a chest tube, to manage a ventilator built for minimal mass, not maximal capability, all while being one of only a handful of healthy adults available to keep the ship or habitat functioning. While personally exhausted, emotionally involved, and acutely aware that if this patient dies, it is not just a human loss, it may be a mission-ending blow. Some propose advanced telemedicine using automation and AI, a robotic surgeon guided by algorithms, walls lined with smart devices capable of suggesting diagnoses and treatments. Such technology could help, offering step-by-step guidance, real-time analysis of vital signs, and adaptive protocols. But even the most advanced systems cannot conjure missing supplies or reverse degraded medications. And no algorithm can fully shoulder the emotional burden of making decisions when failure means losing someone you live inches away from every hour of every day. In this way, a Mars mission forces us to confront something uncomfortable. We often imagine exploration as a matter of rockets and radiation shields, habitats and helmets. But deep space is also a place where medicine itself becomes experimental, where our entire understanding of emergency care must be rewritten in an environment that does not care about our training, our tools, or our intentions. A sudden pain in the night, a tooth that breaks on a hard ration bar, a fever that will not go down. Each of these is a story on Earth with hundreds of possible endings, most of them mundane. On a spacecraft to Mars, they are chapters in a very different kind of narrative, one where the limits of our technology, our knowledge, and our courage collide. Because in the end, the journey to Mars is not just a test of rockets and robots. It is a test of how much risk we are willing to accept when every medical emergency is no longer a question of where is the nearest hospital, but can we survive this alone with what we have in a place where help will never arrive in time? And once that reality is understood, another question emerges, one that reaches beyond the operating table, beyond the flight plan, and into the heart of the mission itself. If Mars can break the human body so completely, even in an instant, what does it mean to try to come home? By the time the first crew has survived the journey to Mars, lived through its dust storms, thin air, and crush in isolation, something subtle but profound has happened. They have not simply visited another world. Their bodies have begun to belong to it. Every heartbeat, every red blood cell, every bone cell dividing in the quiet of the night has been recalibrating to a lower gravity, a different rhythm of day and night, a new landscape of stress and strain. And when the mission clock finally runs out and a launch window opens for Earth, a question hangs heavier than any spacesuit. Can you actually come home and survive it? The voyage back does not start with ignition. It starts with a body already damaged. Months of microgravity during the outbound trip have thinned bones and shrunk muscles. On Mars, gravity returns, but only as a faint echo, about 38% of what we know on Earth. It is enough to stand, to walk, to work. It is not enough to fully reverse what has been lost, so when the crew climbs back into their ascent vehicle, they are not the same people who left Earth. Their skeletons may have shed up to 1–2% of bone mass per month during the interplanetary flight. Their spinal discs may be swollen, their eyes subtly reshaped, their immune systems confused and dulled. Some of this may have been partially recovered during their time on Mars. Much of it will not be. The ride home asks their bodies to pay the bill for every compromise made along the way. In deep space again, Mars shrinking behind them, they re-enter a world with no up, no down, and no weight. Fluids that had just started to settle on Mars are once again pulled upward. Faces puff, legs thin, hearts grow a little lazier, blood volume decreases. The cardiovascular system, which on Earth must constantly fight gravity, now coasts. And in that weightless coasting, something insidious happens. The body forgets how to stand. When the spacecraft finally approaches Earth, wrapped in a blue halo they once called home, the threat waiting for them is not simply the roaring flames of re-entry. It is gravity itself. Imagine spending years training for a marathon, then spending months lying in bed, and finally being asked to sprint up a mountain with no warning. That is what Earth's gravity feels like after Mars. Only this time, the heart is the runner. As the capsule hits the thicker layers of atmosphere and deceleration forces build, blood is pulled downward with relentless force. The heart must fight to push blood up to the brain. Arteries must constrict with perfect timing. Reflexes honed over a lifetime on Earth are rusty now. Some might fail. Astronauts returning from just 6 months on the International Space Station often need to be carried out of their capsules, dizzy, weak, their vision blurred. Some briefly lose consciousness when they try to stand. Now stretch that vulnerability across a 3-year Mars mission with higher radiation exposure, more bone loss, more muscle atrophy, more psychological strain. Landing on Earth might feel less like coming home and more like surviving a controlled crash into your own biology. And then there is time. Radiation on the journey and on the Martian surface acts like a slow, invisible aging machine. High-energy particles slice through DNA, damage cells, and accelerate processes we associate with growing old. Telomeres, the protective caps at the ends of chromosomes, may shorten more quickly. The immune system might resemble that of someone decades older. Cataracts form sooner. Cancer risk rises, not in a dramatic explosion, but as a quiet statistical weight. When these travelers set foot on Earth again, if they can, they may be biologically older than their years. Knees that never bent under full Earth weight during those long months may ache. Vertebrae that elongated in space and compressed again on Mars might protest with chronic pain. Hearts remodeled by years of altered. Ship be designed as a slow-turning wheel, giving its crew a fraction of Earth gravity on the way there and back. Pharmaceutical approaches are being tested. Drugs that preserve bone density, enhance muscle growth, or protect against radiation damage. Exercise regimes using advanced resistive devices aim to trick the body into thinking it's still fighting gravity. Nutrition plans seek to counteract inflammation and support repair. On Mars itself, habitats might be partially spun, or built underground with centrifuges for sleep and exercise. Colonists may cycle through periods of artificial higher gravity to help their bodies maintain some compatibility with Earth. And on the other side of the journey, rehabilitation programs on Earth will likely become as sophisticated as any space mission. Returning crews may spend months in carefully controlled environments, relearning to stand, walk, and run, retraining their cardiovascular reflexes, monitoring their hearts and brains in real time. Virtual reality could help ease the psychological transition, blending Martian memories with earthly realities in a gradual reacclimation. Will all of this be enough? No one knows. Some damage may be reversible, some may be permanent. Some may only appear decades later in the quiet statistics of cancer registries and geriatric wards. The return journey dilemma is not just a technical challenge, it is a philosophical one. What does home mean if your body has been rewritten by another world? How much change are we willing to accept in pursuit of exploration? At what point does a trip to Mars stop being a visit and become an emigration? Standing at the edge of this future, we are both the architects and the test subjects. The first people who go may return as something subtly different from what they were. Ambassadors, not just between planets, but between versions of humanity shaped by different gravities, different skies, different risks. For them, and for us, the question may not be simply, can you ever come home? It may become, after Mars, what does home even mean? By now, our imaginary crew has crossed more than empty space. They've crossed the hidden limits of what a human body was ever designed to endure. Radiation has quietly carved through their DNA. Their bones have thinned, their muscles have withered, their vision has blurred, their immune system misfires. Their minds have stared into months of isolation, confinement, and the constant knowledge that there is no quick way home. A trip to Mars is not one problem. It is all of them, stacked together, compounding over time. On Earth, we usually face these threats one at a time. A broken bone, an infection, a bad week. On the journey to Mars, they arrive as a chorus. A small vision change makes it harder to work out. Less exercise speeds bone loss. Weakened bones increase the danger of a fall during a sudden emergency. Stress and poor sleep erode judgment right when calm thinking is needed most. The real enemy isn't any single risk. It's how they weave together into a web that slowly tightens around the crew. And yet, there are people right now training, volunteering, insisting they would go even if it were a one-way trip. Not because they underestimate the danger, but because they measure it against something larger. The chance to push the human story beyond the blue horizon of Earth. To be the first footprints on a new world is to knowingly place your health, and maybe your life, on the altar of history. The dangers are severe, but they are not necessarily final. Every year, we learn a little more about shielding against radiation, about artificial gravity concepts, about drugs and exercises that can slow bone loss and muscle atrophy. Engineers test inflatable habitats, underground Martian dwellings, rotating spacecraft, smart medical systems powered by AI that could guide surgeries millions of kilometers from Earth. Psychologists experiment with virtual reality windows, carefully designed routines, and group dynamics training to keep small crews sane in very small spaces. None of this erases the cost. It only changes the exchange rate. Fewer cancers, but not zero. Slower bone loss, but not none. Better mental health strategies, but still months of isolation with the same few faces and the same metal walls. We may one day turn a Mars mission from a near-suicidal gamble into a high-risk expedition. But high risk will likely be part of the job description for a very long time. Why keep going anyway? Because this is what our species has always done. We step into oceans before we've mapped the storms. We cross mountains before we know what's on the other side. We build ships, then argue for generations over whether they were worth the lives they claimed. Exploration has never been free. It has only ever been paid for in advance by the people willing to go first. So the real question is not, can we go to Mars? Technically, we probably can. The question is, how much are we willing to pay in flesh, in years of health, in quiet lifelong consequences, to plant a flag in red dust and say, we were here first? Is the birth of a multi-planet civilization worth the hidden scars on the bodies of its pioneers? I'd like to hear what you think. Would you take that risk? Let me know in the comments. And tell me where in the world you're watching from. If you found this deep dive into the harsh reality of space travel valuable, please take a moment to like the video, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss what comes next. And if you'd like to support the channel a little bit more, you can optionally join as a YouTube member. Completely up to you. But it helps us keep making content like this. In the end, the road to Mars will be paved with difficult choices. The question we all have to answer is simple and impossible. When the first real mission is ready, and the seats are waiting, will the price of being pioneers be one we are truly willing to pay?